Hello, my name is Jason Seller. I'm a professor here at Fort Hays State University, and this is going to be a short demonstration of how we utilize ChatGPT in an advanced Python course. So in our advanced Python course, one of the activities that the students are working on is mini project 3 here. And so they're learning Flask, which is a small web framework based in Python. And the students are tasked with coming up with a project that meets these certain requirements. And as the students are learning about Flask, some of the cool things that they could do with ChatGPT is one, learn more about Flask itself and mostly how to get started. So they've gone through the tutorial that Flask offers. And once they've set up that proper folder structure according to the tutorial, they're required to create a minimum of 5 pages using templates and some get and post routes along with the SQLite database that they need to set up. So a lot of times for students like this, where they're very open-ended projects, we don't give them strict guidelines as to what they have to do. It's more of they get to come up and create their own custom projects for something they may be interested in. We just have these guidelines that they need to follow. So to get them sparked as to what they need to do, a lot of times what we're trying to do is push them out to ChatGPT and see what they can come up with. So what's great about this is we just need to set up the environment. And so the initial startup for this would be something like we are working on a Python Flask project. And what that does is help set up the code prompting from within ChatGPT, let them know that, hey, we're working on Flask. And so it's going to start tailoring some of these responses based on this task or this project. So what we're going to do is try to create a very simple web application that hosts some PDF files. But one of the requirements that was listed there is that it needs a login and registration system. And then once they're logged in, maybe they could upload some PDF files and such. And we're not going to go through the whole activity in this demo, but what we really want to do is just focus on how they can get started. So I need to build a Flask project that has a registration system built from scratch and allows me to upload PDF files once I am logged in so that they may be hosted to others. Okay. So by setting up that little Flask here, the best part about this is it's going to give them a generalized structure of what they need to set up and some steps along the way. So I like to think of this in phases, and that's kind of how we work with students is say, hey, chop this up in little phases or little mini projects so we can understand what we need to do. So if we look at the different steps here, and then it gives us a great outline of what we need to go through. So the first part is setting up a Flask project, and the good news is we utilize PyCharm in our classroom. And so we were able to get started with a nice little PyCharm Flask template here. And then from there, we need to do some setup on the database. And so it'll say you'll need to set up a database to store the user information about those uploaded PDFs. And they're using Flask SQL Alchemy as a common choice for those. In this case, because we're teaching from the very beginning and these students don't have access to things like Flask user, Flask login, or even SQL Alchemy at this point, they need to be actually coding those from scratch. So we're not looking for them to actually build their entire project from ChatGPT, but it should help them get a generalized structure, and they're going to have to learn to reformat that as they go through. So from here, we'll go with in step 2, you said we needed a database. What would that look like without using Flask SQL Alchemy? And we generally get a nice little response here. So it's going to ask that we install SQLite 3, which we have there by default. And then we need to set up a basic database in order for this to come in. We need to create some tables, which is exactly how we teach the students to go through this. This is kind of the database schema that you would see here. And then you would have the basic CRUD operations, which is going to allow them to interact with that database and close that. So the students worked with the Flash tutorial, and that tutorial asked them to create a db.py file that handles all database interactions. So we may want to have ChatGPT give us a basic introduction of what that is, so that then we can massage that over the place. So we could say, can you create a db.py file that handles all database interactions and creates the initial schema with a schema file. So these students, again, they need to create a schema file. That was part of those requirements that we initially showed. And we can see we get a great start here. So here's an example of a db.py file that handles all those interactions, everything we talked about before. And then we get a great schema.sql file that we can put in here. And so this is a great start for them. They're going to edit this many, many times as they go, but we can simply hit copy code over here, come back to our project, and we can create a new file with Python and create this db.py file, put that in here. And then we also had a schema SQL file. So if we go over here and right click and do a new file, schema.sql. And if we go back to our ChatGPT, we could copy out that stuff and get that up and going as well. So it's a great way for the students to get started. Now, again, this isn't going to be the final one, right? Because this is just showing us how to upload some things and some text. We're going to be massaging that along the way. And in this demo, what we're really showing is that students can use this as a boilerplate or a template so that they can get moving. Let's see. Can you generate a app.py file that would work for this project? And so for this particular project within Flask, we want to generate an app.py. That's kind of the base file that goes through there. And these that we see up here, these are pretty common. So these are going to be connections back to that database file that we created. We've got some uploads and some things are in there. That all looks great. So what we can do is use that as a boilerplate to get started. So let's go ahead and copy that code. We come into our app.py and overwrite that. That's great. Now to get us started here, let's go ahead and just launch this demo. And we can take a look at this website. And you can see we got a nice basic homepage. So we generated a nice homepage. Now let's go take a look at the different routes we have. We have a dashboard, a login, a register. So let's go take a look at that register. And you can see we have nothing there. Now that's probably because it's going to use a register template, right? So let's come in here and look at our register. And sure enough, it's trying to render a register.html, and we have no templates. So what's great here again is some of the students that need a little bit of help getting that basic template set up. We could say, can you give me an example of register.html? And as you can see, it will generate a very basic HTML file. Now, one thing that we have here within Flask, we have a nice templating system. And so we would want to utilize that when we go to build these out. So we could say, can you utilize a base.html file as a template? And so now we're going to get a nice base HTML file as well as our register file. And again, this gives us a great way to go ahead and put that stuff in here. So you'll notice you have the flash messages and I want you to put it in there. So we can go ahead and take this base.html code. Let's come in here to our templates, new and HTML. We'll go ahead and copy that code in. And then we can say, can you give me an updated register.html? And what's nice about that is now that we've made that change to tell it to use the base HTML file, it's going to go ahead and update that with the final copy of that. We could kind of copy and place, which is what it's asking for us to do here. But it's much easier if we go ahead and just ask it for an updated version. So again, we're not looking for this to code the entire project. What we're trying to do is help them get some templates to get started. So if we have a register.html, Copy and paste. And now that we have all that and our website's up and going, we can come back here and check it. And sure enough, we have a nice little app registration here. So this is a great way for students to get started. They can get a lot more fancy. We could tell them to use things like Bootstrap and things like that. As we can see here, Bootstrap classes are applied, and it can actually assist them in making sure that they get those in the right places. So we could ask this thing to include Bootstrap and JavaScript, and it would go ahead and make it a little bit more fancy. This is a great way for web developers to get a jump start in the class. And for most of our students in the advanced Python class, they're not necessarily, web front end programmers. They came from the introductory Python course, and this allows them to have a little bit of a flexibility going forward. I hope you enjoyed this demo, and good luck to both Angela and Ramsey at the presentation.